Okay. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for being here. Just got some more people joining at this time. Thank you so much for being here. Okay, if you can hear me. Yep, everyone can hear me well. Alhamdulillah, that's really good. So once again, assalamu alaikum. Good evening, everybody. My name is Annie McCann. I am one of the co-founders of this amazing network called the Right Pen Collective. It was a newly created network that was put together in an effort to support, connect, and empower Muslim writers here in Australia. Because for a very long time, we were asking the same question. Where are all the Muslim writers here in Australia? We know that they exist, but we don't see them as commonly as we see Vegemite on supermarket shelves. So inshallah, with an effort like this, we can connect and bring all these people together, and hopefully we'll see more and more books written by the Muslim community. I would first like to pay my respects to the traditional custodians of the land in which I am live streaming from. Specifically, I am coming to you live from the land of the Darug people of the Eora Nation. I would also like to extend my respects to the elders past, present, and emerging, acknowledging the fact that the land that I am on is stolen land and sovereignty was not conceded. So once again, thank you very much for joining us today. Just some housekeeping. I would just like to let everybody know that I will be your host this evening. So if you have any questions, please send them through directly to me in the chat. My name is the Right Pen Collective for the night, so I should be at the top of your chat screen. Please remember that comments and questions in this place are to be respectful. Any form of abuse or disrespect will not be tolerated, and we will remove you from the session if any such behavior occurs. So without further ado, I'd just like to introduce you to our special guests tonight. I'm very excited to be here to talk to these amazing authors. First of all, I would like to introduce you to Dr. Mohammed Ahmad. He's the founding director of Sweatshop Literacy Movement based in Western Sydney. He's also an award-winning author and the Miles Franklin Literary Finalist, and he's known for his books, The Lebs, The Other Half of You, and The Tribe. I'll just actually do a very quick share of what The Lebs and The Other Half of You look like for those who may not know. So I'm just going to share my screen very quickly. So that's The Lebs by Dr. Mohammed Ahmad. And I'll also just do a very quick show and tell of The Other Half of You. There we go. Those books are also available in your leading bookstores, but particularly our festival partners, Better Read Than Dead, they have them in stock, and the link will be in the chat for you to purchase them. Free shipping as well. Very exciting news. Okay, and our last but not least, our special guest, Amani Haydar. She's an artist, lawyer, mother, and advocate for women's health based in Western Sydney also. She's also an Archibald finalist, and she's the author of The Mother Wound, which came out this year. I'm just going to share the picture of that as well. Oh, and we also have a show and tell from Michael Muhammad. Thank you. There we go. I've just put that on screen. We've got a few people who have that book. That's fantastic. Thank you. So once again, those books are available from our festival partner, Better Read Than Dead. The link is in the chat. Please head over there and get yourself a copy. It's really worth your time to do so. So Brother Mohammed and Sister Amani, welcome. Thank you very much for giving up your hour to talk to us this evening. It's a pleasure to meet you both. First of all, how are you both going?
Alhamdulillah, I'm doing okay. I'm getting tired of lockdown, but persisting with it. So we'll get there eventually.
Yes, yes. Brother Mohammed, you're well?
I'm well too, alhamdulillah, yeah, thank you.
Alhamdulillah, yeah, as well as we can be, because the three of us are from the western suburbs of Sydney, New South Wales. We've been in lockdown and locked LGAs for some time. Before I go into some of the questions I'd like to ask, I just wanted to remind our viewers that tonight's specific panel is about adult contemporary writing, and there will be some references to things such as domestic violence and coarse language. So please understand that viewer discretion for tonight is advised. Okay, so Brother Mohammed, if I could start with you, could you please talk to us a little bit about your writing process and the writing journey that you've had so far, and maybe talk to us a little bit about how you created Sweatshop Literacy?
Okay, so that's a very big question. I'm not going to be able to cover it all. What I will say is that there's this myth that writing is a natural talent, and that it's just something that just comes from your imagination. There's some truth to that. It's originality is not something that you can be taught, and subjectivity, that kind of unique experience is not something that can be taught. And so there is truth in that. But creative writing is also a skill. It's something you can learn to do. And so for me, I spent 10 years in university studying creative writing, an arts degree, an honors degree, and a PhD in creative writing, literature, and cultural theory. And a lot of people, when I say this, they kind of, give me like I know what you mean, but they don't really take me seriously. They don't seem to fully understand what I mean. So this is how I will try to explain it. What's the difference between a dead metaphor, an absolute metaphor, and a metonym? What's the difference between autobiography fiction and autobiographical fiction? What's the difference between open third-person perspective and closed first-person perspective? These are things you can learn. And if you learn those things, you can apply them to your creative writing. And if you apply them to your creative writing can improve. So that's what I mean when I say it's a skill that you can learn, in addition to whatever beautiful, unique subjectivities you might have. In terms of Sweatshop, it's a literacy movement that I established in 2012, which is devoted to empowering minorities, people of color, and Indigenous people through reading, writing, and critical thinking. And for anyone who's interested in Sweatshop, in what we're doing as an audience member or as a budding writer from a minority yourself, you can check out our website, which is sweatshop.ws, and you can follow us on social media.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Brother Mohammed. Amani, I'd like to ask the same sort of question to you about your writing journey so far, and a little bit about how you got to writing yourself.
Yeah, I've had an interesting journey, and it intersects with some of the journey that Mohammed just described. So I started writing initially in a more disciplined way after losing my mum to domestic violence. And I found that in order to effectively share her experience and have it told in a nuanced and respectful manner, it was empowering for me to be able to do it myself rather than through the media or through an interviewer, etc. So I started writing after realizing that my victim impact statement given in court wasn't enough and it didn't cover everything I wanted to say. And I realized pretty quickly that if I wanted to develop that and I guess embark on a deeper writing journey, I would have to, as Mohammed said, build up my skills and actually learn about what I'm doing and develop my craft. So I eventually joined Sweatshop Women. I was part of the collective for ages, still am, and I, during that time, was able to take my work and read it and share it with the sisters in the group and receive really thorough, extensive, and empowering feedback on my writing. And I had so many breakthroughs as a result of being in that space. And at the same time, I built up my literacy around race and racism because that was an issue that was going to intersect with a lot of the themes that I wanted to write about. And I think it was really important to develop confidence in that space before putting my story out in the world.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. And I'm given to understand, because you've mentioned Sweatshop, so you have worked with Brother Mohammed over some time. Tell us a little bit about that journey.
Yeah, so I initially joined Sweatshop in, I've even forgotten the exact time, maybe early 2019. I illustrated Sweatshop Women Volume 2 and provided the cover art for that collection. And that was amazing because I got to depict each of the contributors to Sweatshop Women Volume 2, amazing women who I had gotten to know on quite a personal level as well, having attended the Sweatshop workshops myself. So there's something particularly intimate and there's a responsibility that goes with depicting people that you know and care about. And there's something really beautiful about having women represented visually in the collection so that people can see the strength of that diversity and to simply celebrate the contributors. So that was a beautiful project to be a part of. And throughout that period, I was also benefiting from being in the workshop space while developing my own writing.
Can I add something?
Yes, please.
Because that's Amani's version of her relationship with Sweatshop. But I've never talked about how I met Amani. I've never disclosed that publicly, and so I really want to share it because I think it's a beautiful story. I think it was in 2019, or it would have been at least late 2018. Myself, Amani, and our sister Sarah Soleh, who's an award-winning poet from a Palestinian background and who I know had an event with this festival as well a couple of days ago. were shortlisted for an award, a Muslim Australian award in the arts category. And in Sweatshop, I've probably worked with about 10,000 artists and writers over my career. And our collective, the women's collective and the Sweatshop Writers Group, that collective is made up of about 100 people. And over the years, maybe about 1,000 people have come through that collective. And maybe about 99.9% of those people have come to me. They've sent me an email or they saw me at an event and came up to me and said, I want to join. But I discovered Amani through that shortlisting. I saw her name, you know, alongside mine and Sarah's. And I Googled her because I was interested. And I was just so incredibly inspired by her story, by her art, by her writing, that she's one of the very few people in my entire career that I headhunted, that I reached out to and said, I want to work with you, sister, because I was just so incredibly moved, not just by her story, but by her resilience and her capacity to create art in response to some of the things she's experienced.
That is a very beautiful story. That is a beautiful story. Wow, that's a real honor. That's fantastic. Speaking of art, I just wanted to also share a painting that has really caught my eye. Sister Amani, would you mind talking us through this for a little moment, if you could, please? Can you see that? Is it there?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, yeah.
So I guess before I began sharing my writing publicly with the world, I was using visual art to start telling parts of my story, my mum's story and my grandmother's story, Allah yarhamon. And that was a way of building a safe space for myself when I had spent a long period of time feeling quite unsafe, unsure of what forum exactly I wanted to tell my story in, and having faced significant personal trauma as well as structural barriers that compounded my experience. So what came naturally to me and what I felt confident doing was painting. I wasn't ready to share my writing at this point, so that was a bit of a slower journey. So I decided that I would enter the Archibald Prize. I decided that in 2017, and I let fear and doubt basically overcome me, and I didn't paint a self-portrait that year. And then I decided again in 2018, I just thought, you know what, you don't need permission from anybody. It's open to the public. There's, you know, you got nothing to lose. So this image had formed in my mind, which would be a self-portrait of myself holding a photo of my mum, holding a photo of her mum. And the photo itself is printed straight off the Fairfax website with just a home printer. And it even has the Fairfax watermark over it, because by the time I started painting, I'd waited until about 10 days before the due date. That painting was painted in about 10 days. So I printed it out, and I think that's an interesting commentary on her own stories in the first place. The photo had been taken back in 2006 when my grandmother was killed in an Israeli drone strike in the south of Lebanon. And during that period, 1,300 Lebanese civilians roughly lost their lives. And the incident in which my grandmother was killed was actually investigated as a war crime, because it had the hallmarks of a war crime. It was a group of civilians who had been set upon. I think 12 people were killed in the same incident. And there had been no resolution and no justice as a result of that violation of their rights. So it was important to me to share my mum's story, but to also go further than that and explore the ways in which violence has affected women in multiple ways and as a result of multiple structural issues as well. So, you know, patriarchal and colonial violence shaped my mum's life, and it also shaped my grandmother's life. And I was linking those two experiences through my visual art and through this particular painting, which I then submitted to the Archibald Prize, and to my shock, was accepted into the finalist exhibition at the Art Gallery of New South Wales, which gets visited by about, I think, 140,000 people a day. I don't know. Don't quote me on the number, but a lot of people.
A lot.
So I was nervous about that, but it felt like the right way to invite the public into a dialogue with me about the things I wanted to talk about.
Fantastic. And congratulations, because that's an incredible honor. And 10 days. You took me back there when you said 10 days to do that painting. That's a really well done. So Amani, I just wanted to continue this with you just for a moment, because you experienced a lot of significant trauma in your life, and you're putting that in art, and you're also putting that into your writing. Is that a form of healing for you? Is that how you deal with that? Is that the way, or the reason as to why you were writing?
It's part of it, but it's not the whole purpose, because if I wanted to do it for my own healing only, I could do it in the therapy context alone. I could write for myself alone, which is how I started. I could make art and keep it to myself as well. I think the way I see both my words and my images is a form of storytelling, but a form of storytelling that's conscious of the political environment that we're in, something that's trying to connect really isolating and seemingly unique experiences and subjectivity to broader political issues and social issues. And I think that's where I feel the most, I guess, the sense of reward of communicating a story to other people powerfully, of having people who have had very different lives actually say to me, you know what, I actually connected with this thing that you created. I connected with this piece of writing, and I saw a part of myself within that. I think that's what really drives me, and it's what I love doing.
Wonderful, thank you. Speaking of environment, this is a question for both Brother Mohammed and Sister Amani. A lot of commentary coming out of particularly the Muslim community is that there are a lot of writers who want to tell their story, an authentic story representing a Muslim character or representing Muslim identity, but there is this hesitancy of writing because we are living in a Western market that is surrounded by Islamophobia. But clearly both of you are very accomplished authors, and you've broken down that barrier somewhere. So I'd like to know, first of all, what your trick was to do that, but also I guess your experience as a Muslim writer that's risen above something like this. What are your thoughts on this? Brother Mohammed, maybe if we can start with you.
I think the hesitancy, at least from the experiences I've had working with members of the Muslim community in writing, is a burden of representation. So we are very aware that our community is under a lot of fire all the time, that we are being accused. Let's just talk about it in the Australian context, that we are regularly being accused of being sexual predators, terrorist suspects, gangsters, drug dealers. That's regarding the men. The women in our community are regularly constructed as victims who are inherently oppressed and have no agency of their own. And as a collective community, we're generally represented as ignorant and uneducated, primitive, uncivilized. And so the problem is that when we have to tell our stories, we want to be courageous enough to be critical of our community and tell honest stories that are addressing issues of patriarchy, in Amani's case, for example, domestic violence, issues of the gangs that might have existed in our neighborhood, some of the violence that I saw at school. We want to be able to talk about some of the toxic behavior, but we feel like if we do so, it will be used mainly by a right-wing agenda to fuel the conflicts, for example, and the wars and the illegal invasions in the Middle East. And so we're reluctant to share a kind of complex and nuanced and intersectional story because we know it can be manipulated and exploited. What I would say to our listeners, and I don't just say this to Muslims. I think the Prophet Muhammad had messages and morals that can apply to everybody. But one of the important hadiths I learned from the Prophet at a young age is speak the truth, even if it's against you. And I take that with me into my writing. I never, ever pull my punches. I always try to offer complex and nuanced and sophisticated portrayals of our community, even if it risks reinforcing negative stereotypes, because the reality of our community is that we are three-dimensional, we're human beings. And so that's the advice I would give to any Muslim writer who's hesitant and who's afraid.
Wonderful, thank you. Sister Amani?
Yeah, I think Mohammed has spoken to a really huge aspect of my writing and my own experience. when I lost my mum in a brutal act of domestic violence in 2015, the story was front page news the very next day. I didn't have a social media platform. I didn't have a writing platform. And as at that date, I was practicing as a commercial solicitor at a law firm in the city, doing something completely unrelated and separate to what I do now. I immediately felt the pressure of having to navigate grief and trauma and confront the barrier, I don't even know how to describe it, the awful behavior that I was experiencing within my own family, at the same time as protecting myself against the racism and the Islamophobia that would inevitably exist in the response to my mum's story. And, you know, my mum's story in a lot of ways actually fed into the stereotypes that exist. My experiences were very easily capable of being pulled into those boxes and depicted in a way that really flattened them and erased the nuance and the complexity of my mum's life, erased her agency, erased how my own response to that grief and that loss was playing out. And that was something that I didn't just imagine that, it was tangible. The responses were in the comments sections on Facebook. There were people trivializing the murder, making fun of it, saying, oh, of course this has happened in a Muslim family. It didn't reflect the religious reality that I had been brought up in. It didn't reflect the dynamics of my household. It didn't reflect the fact that neither my mum nor my dad actually fit those exact stereotypes. So it was very important to me to tackle all of those things head on in becoming an advocate. And consequently, one of the first things I wrote was in relation to this double bind that Muslim women find themselves in when confronting patriarchy within their own community and racism and Islamophobia from the broader public. And that's continued. It doesn't go away. The environment has not changed. I'm going to read, if you don't mind, an email I got recently from someone who listened to an interview I did with ABC Conversations in relation to my book. And this is an example of some of the similar things that get said on social media when I have a public appearance. Dear Amani, after listening with great interest to your ABC radio interview on Conversations and the dreadful trauma you endured, I was moved by your motivation to share your experience with the wider public, and I congratulate you for speaking out. I do feel compelled and saddened, however, to comment on your public voice. Rather than empowering Muslim women to free themselves from control and oppression, or encouraging your community to embrace equal rights, you choose to advocate freedom while wearing the hijab. Your message is contradictory, in particular when you say that your father wasn't religious and didn't encourage your mother to wear a hijab. Please note that this message is not intended to offend or take away from your horrendous experience in any way, but simply the expression of millions of bewildered Australian women and men who fail to understand how women who wear the hijab can honestly believe they are free. And that's a really typical example of the lens that's applied to my work. The fact that I can be fully qualified and informed and have lived experience and understand the issues that I'm advocating against and speaking about in immense detail, and have had lots of practice doing so, and still be seen as lacking credibility because I choose to wear a hijab. And this person has obviously not read my book because I talk quite a bit about these nuances. And it's very unfortunate that they are so resistant to a message that is for the greater good of society, and that resistance comes down to their own racism.
Yeah, so I just kept shaking my head when you read that, because I'm sure this came from a place of ignorance. Like, anybody who would know a Muslim woman would understand that the hijab is not a sign of oppression, that Islam holds women with highest honors. You know, the basic message of paradise lying at the foot of your mother, that is a very strong message that women have a strong status, education is very profound here. And I'm sorry, I just keep shaking my head, because when I hear comments like this, it's a sign of ignorance, I think. And it just sometimes feels like, you know, when you're sending a powerful message as a Muslim person, it feels like no matter what you're doing, there will be someone who try and criticize you from a different angle. Brother Mohammed, was there something you'd like to add to that? Yeah.
Well, I mean, the thing is that when I, in Australia, there's actually quite a unique phenomenon where Muslim Australian women and Arab Australian women, I speak specifically about Arab Australian because that's my community.
Sure.
And they're very interconnected for me, those two identities. But with the Muslim Australian and Arab Australian community, the women in our community have pretty much outshone the men on every level, you know. And my area of expertise is in publishing, in editing, and in creative writing. And, you know, Arab women's excellence and Muslim women's excellence in Australia, I always say, and the figures and the statistics back this up, that for every half decent Arab Muslim man, there are 10 incredible Arab Muslim women. And the excellence we've seen, that can't happen, you know, if we just look at the literature that has been produced. And it's not a coincidence, for example, that the majority of the participants in this festival have been women, because they've really been leading the way since 9/11. Starting with, I think, Does My Head Look Big in This by Dr. Randa Abdul Fattah. It's not a coincidence, but it's also impossible for that to happen if our sisters didn't have any agency. And so it's important to understand that this is intentional. You know, it's intentional on the part of white Australia to choose to look at our community in such a limited way. It's a deliberate decision to be ignorant. And it's important, that ignorance is important, because when you are backing policies that justify the illegal invasion of another country, and you want to go to bed at night with a clear conscience, you have to dehumanize these people. You cannot imagine them as real human beings. The minute you start to understand that Muslim women have agency, have complex lives, have control, the minute you start to see them in a three-dimensional and complex way, is the minute you will start to hesitate about some of the policies that your government is implementing. And I want to make one more point, because I brought up Randa. You know, when she was on Q&A a few months ago, a panelist was talking about her, an audience member was talking about her concern about the mistreatment of a dog in Israel. And Randa had to remind that audience member and pretty much the country that there are Palestinian children who are being slaughtered. Bombs are being dropped on their heads. And it does often feel like we have been dehumanized to such a level that the integrity and dignity of a dog is put higher than us. And so I'm very, when I hear those kinds of comments that Amani has received, it doesn't surprise me. It does break my heart. But what I will say back, what I always say back is to that group of people is that I'm not interested anymore in reassuring you that I don't mean you any harm. You know, for me, it's like this. If you are a racist, you should be afraid of me, because I'm going to come for you.
Fair enough. Good point. Good point. And look, Sister Amani, I just can't help but thinking that if it was a non-Muslim woman writing a book about domestic violence and her significant trauma in her life, she would not have copped that sort of commentary. I'm sure she would be, you know, applauded for her bravery and, oh, you're empowering and everything. It would have been very different. Would you agree? I feel it would have been a very different story had you not been a Muslim woman writing that book.
I think the key difference is that from very early on, I had to be aware of the fact that I couldn't just publicly share my mum's story or grieve publicly or advocate publicly and receive the level of respect and dignity that's afforded to other advocates without worrying or confronting the fact that I was visibly Muslim, and confronting the the glaze, the overlay that would be put on top of my story and my mum's story. And that was incredibly silencing. And that stops other women from coming forward. We know for a fact that it stops Muslim women from approaching police, reporting domestic violence. And that's why DV is very underreported in our community. Muslim women are afraid of feeding back into stereotypes that might harm the men in their lives. These are complex realities that we have to face, and that White Australia is completely contributing to. And these are issues that need to be heard on a policy level. And I think that's part of I see that as part of my role as an advocate. And it was very important to me from the get-go to retain ownership of my story, to tell it in my own way, to exercise my agency, and to ultimately honour my mum's life and afford her the dignity and the respect that she deserved as one of the 81 women who lost their lives to violence in Australia that year.
Sure, understood. This is a question I'd like to ask both of you, just based on what you were saying about telling your story and keeping that authentic, and of course, amplifying Muslim voices and keeping that authentic. Did you need to, for lack of a better word, be careful with your writing for fear that you may, offend, your own community or the external community reading your book? How do you find a balance? Did you need to find a balance in your writing so it's accessible by both communities? Brother Mohammed?
The first thing I'll say is, can I request that after we answer this question, because we've been talking about quite a bit of the negative aspects of the writing, and the negative, the negative stories we are compelled to tell. But if you read Amani's book, The Mother Wound, if you read my book, The Other Half of You, the actual core of the books is about love. And it's not, I don't know, it's some kind of maybe some spiritual energy, or it's just a coincidence, but mine and Amani's book really resonate with each other. Like I wrote it as a letter to my son, and I really write about Arab and Muslim fatherhood, and that journey, and informing my children in that context. And Amani comes at it from the perspective of motherhood, And so when people ask me about my book, because I called it The Other Half of You, I say the other half of you is the mother wound. And so I would like an opportunity to talk about love in our stories as well. But to answer your question at face value, what I would say is that I think we have a responsibility as writers. And if we don't do it, no one is going to do it, or at the very least, they're not going to do it as well as us. We have a responsibility to talk about some of the problems that our communities face. And we talk about, for example, the toxic men, the patriarchy, and we're very explicit in that issue. But and in terms of the question of how I confront that, and am I ever hesitant, am I afraid? I have a saying, and it's something that I've been teaching the writers that I work with for a decade, and I stand by it. You have to write like you're dead. And what I mean by that is, if you're going to pull your punches, if you're going to write in a way where you're concerned about your audience, the writing and the quality of the writing and the purpose of the writing will suffer. And so I literally mean this when I say, then there's no point in writing. You need to write without being inhibited in any way. You need to be free to express yourself 100%. And so I got to say, I live by that. I write like I'm dead. I write knowing that I'm going to put this out in the world, and whatever the consequences may be, I'm willing to face them. And I've got Malcolm X in the background of my screen, and I wrote my PhD on Malcolm X, and I Malcolm X as an important figure in the Black community, but also in the Muslim community. He literally died. He was assassinated for standing up for what he believed in without ever withholding. And so I live by that philosophy and that principle.
And fantastic advice. I like that. Write like you're dead. I'm going to take that with me as well. Sister Amani.
So I wrote "Write Like You're Dead" on a sticky note and stuck it at the bottom of my computer screen while I was writing The Mother Wound. And I had to internalize that philosophy and apply it, because my book is confronting so many different taboos. It's confronting taboos in terms of the immense psychological trauma and mental health challenges that I've had to confront over the past few years. It's writing about a taboo in the sense that it opens up a domestic environment which we're told is private, which we're told is you know, something connected to the honor of the family and the status of the family within the community. It was confronting things that go right to the core of toxic masculinity in Arab and Muslim men, while at the same time trying to, I guess, highlight the pain that the Australian legal system can contribute to, and the pain that is caused when we don't have adequate responses to domestic violence and the issues that flow from domestic violence. So there was no way I could tell that story if I was still shy or embarrassed or afraid of consequences. There was no way that I could have sat there and confronted all of these painful parts of my childhood, things that I'd said in therapy, things that I'd said in court, things that had been said about me by my extended family who were very hostile towards me. If I was going to reinforce those taboos and keep them controlling me, then that writing would not have happened in the first place. And that's so important. So I really value what Mohammed has just said, and I think it is really the key to telling an authentic and powerful story.
Wonderful. Yes, and thank you, Brother Mohammed, for sharing that advice again. Thank you. So yeah, you're right, Brother Mohammed. We spoke a lot about the negative aspects of writing, particularly as a Muslim, but obviously there are rewarding aspects to that. We do have a question coming in from the audience, but I'd like to ask that question first. If you could share some of the rewarding aspects that you have felt as writers and published authors.
I'd love to hear from Amani first, if that's okay.
Please, Sister Amani.
So I've been asked a lot, has there been a backlash in your community, and what's the response been like in your community? Because sometimes there's an assumption that the response from my own community will be negative just because my extended family on my dad's side had a negative response towards, you know, everything I do. And the opposite is true. The number of messages that I've received from Muslim women who are championing my work, who are affirming it, who are validating my experiences and finding validation of their experiences in my writing has been amazing and incredible. And I think that's really the powerful thing about writing memoir or doing advocacy in this space is you're sharing your story, but in doing so, you're carving out a safe space for other women to be able to share theirs. There's also an important dimension to that, which I could have touched on in the previous question, but I think it's important to mention it here. I've lost my mum. My dad's in prison. I've lost a lot of extended family. I've lost my grandmother. I don't have things to lose in regards to family at the moment, and the things that I want to talk about. And there are a lot of women who are in situations where they're still preserving relationships, or where they do not have the opportunity yet or the freedom to explore through literature their experiences, or to explore it in any kind of a public way. So I think there's an immense privilege in being able to do that, and in creating a space where down the track another woman might feel that, you know what, I'm going to write my story and I'm going to put it out there, and I'm going to be part of this dialogue that's taking place. And that's, I like that idea, and I like the idea that writing can do that. So I've forgotten the question.
You were telling us about the rewarding experience, which you have definitely touched on.
Oh, well, I've answered it then.
Readers getting validated, the validation through your work is a rewarding aspect. That's what you were saying. Yeah,
definitely. And finally, the creativity that goes into celebrating and honoring people who were so strong and so influential in my life. My mum and my grandmother, who both achieved incredible things, had a profound impact on their own community. My grandmother raised 9 children through war and occupation. My mum married young and migrated and confronted every kind of barrier that a migrant woman might expect to face in order to establish a career, in order to support other people. She was a counsellor at the time of her death. So these are people who were triumphant. And at the end of the day, it was patriarchy and other structural issues that brought them down and that harmed them. So I take immense joy, and it's an honor to be able to celebrate their stories in my writing.
100%, yes. Brother Mohammed?
Yeah, I mean, when I read Amani's book, that's what I really take away from it, you know, the amazing women in her life, including her mother, Allah yarhamha. For me, there's a tradition. It's a new tradition, and it's a bit sad, but men of color, black men, indigenous men, we have this literary style that we're producing at the moment. I don't think anyone's actually consciously noticed it yet, but there's an important indigenous book that's just been released called Dear Son, which is indigenous fathers speaking to their children and vice versa, children speaking to their fathers. And one of the books that inspired me when I was writing The Other Half of You is a book called Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates, which is also addressed to his son. He's an African-American man. And I think the reason why fathers of color and indigenous fathers and black fathers are doing this, why we're writing these books to our children, is because we're kind of preparing them for a world that they're going to have to face, a world that is going to be one that is not going to be polite to them, that's going to be very difficult, particularly when we talk about racism, xenophobia, Islamophobia, for example. And so it's like we're almost trying to, intellectually arm them and prepare them through our stories. And so I don't know if it was intentional when I started, though I will say that I began writing The Other Half of You literally the night my son was born. He was in my arms, while his mum was trying to get a bit of sleep in the hospital, and I was just typing the first scenes on my phone. And I was literally rewriting the birth of him while I was staring at him. And so I guess it just kind of came out. But my point is that there's this kind of really strong love that we feel for our children and this fear underneath. And the reason I'm trying to tell this story is because there's a cartoonist who passed away. His name is Bill Leak. And he famously, just before he passed away, he famously drew a cartoon of an indigenous father not recognizing his son. And a lot of people don't remember this or know this, but Bill Leak had been doing similar cartoons about Arab and Muslim fathers, them throwing their children into war zones. One particular cartoon that comes to mind where a Palestinian father is throwing his child into a war zone and saying, go and win daddy's propaganda war for him. And the subtext to all this is that we don't love our children as much as white men do. And it ties in with that earlier point I was making about the propaganda that is designed to intentionally dehumanize us. And so I really wanted to tell a story that is about the strong and incredible love that Arab and Muslim fathers have the capacity to feel for their children. I want to make one more point. It's about my own father, because I write autobiographical fiction. So it's based on my real life, but it's fiction. Unlike Amani's book, which is a memoir, it's nonfiction. But the father figure in The Other Half of You, that is the father of the narrator, is loosely based on my dad. And my father and I, when I was growing up, we fought a lot. We had very strong differences in what's right and wrong. He was very committed to keeping me restricted to, marrying within the tribe. That's the main arc of the story. And I really broke his heart by, not following the tradition and the customs that he had been raised with. It's so interesting because now, 15 years on, I have a mixed race son who's growing up in a cross-cultural home, in an interfaith home. And my father comes to our house every week and reads to my son in Arabic and teaches him how to read and write in Arabic. And it's just been so inspiring to see my dad's journey and see how much he has shown the capacity to change. And what's motivated that, why my father has, in spite of all of our conflicts over the years, never let me go, I think is because underneath all of it is love. And that's really the story that I want to tell. It's the story of love that we feel for our children and for our parents.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much for sharing those stories with us. We had a few questions coming from the audience. I don't want to miss anybody. I will read one question and then I'm going to hand over to Sister Uzka, our co-founder. She wanted to ask you a question as well. So let me just bring that question up first. So the first question that came through, and excuse my fingers, I'm using a tablet tonight. Okay, so this question came from Anhar Karim. Assalamu alaikum. I had a question, which is to Amani. I read your book, The Mother Wound, which was a tragic novel, and you are such an inspiring woman, mashallah. You mentioned in your book that within your own family, you received backlash for speaking out. Considering the patriarchal structures in your own community and Islamophobic commenting from a racist Australian public, what motivates you to push past this misogynistic and Islamophobic commentary and to continue to tell your story? Thank you. I know you answered part of that, but was there anything else that sort of pushes you through?
I think the answer to that is what Mohammed just said. It's the love I have for my mum. It's the love that I have for my grandmother. It's the anger that I have about the lack of justice that they experienced in their lives, and the anger that I have about the structural barriers that are going to keep creating difficulty in women's lives. And I feel incredibly privileged to have had the type of education and work experience and other experiences that exposed me to how things work and the understanding of how things work in order to, and given me the ability to challenge some of those structural things. And, you know, like I talk about this in the book. I touched on the fact that I was practicing as a commercial solicitor. What that involved was appearing in court on behalf of clients in very fast-paced, stressful matters. And I was familiar with the courtroom, which not a lot of people are. And I was familiar with the legal process, which not a lot of people are. And that's an issue of accessibility. And we have a real issue with accessibility to justice in Australia. And through doing my work, I can help break that down, I hope. And I would like to see things improve so that these spaces are demystified, so that they work more for more people, so that the things that need to be changed and overhauled can be changed and overhauled. And, you know, there's power in that. And I've seen recent change. I had a story that I shared with a local MP, which was then taken to Parliament. And only a couple of weeks ago, the law was changed as a result of that in order to reflect an issue that had been an issue, you know, I had encountered personally and overcome it as an individual, but it had remained, the legislation had remained unchanged. And I pushed for that to be changed because I know that I can't be the only person who faced that. So for me, everything else pales in comparison to the importance of this work and the fact that I see it as urgent and important. And I couldn't, you know, I couldn't bear to be silent. So, yeah.
Thank you. Sister Uskar, if you can hear me, can you unmute yourself?
Yes, can you guys hear me?
Yes,
Okay.
go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I wanted to say Amani isn't the only one with a post-it note from brother Mohammed hanging on their computer. I have here, fake it till you make it. That's when he sat us down and gave us a crash course in marketing, and we were all going, you know, we'll keep this small, you know, just between us, you know, we'll just tell it to a few people. And he's like, no, you're gonna fake it till you make it. So that's how we decided to go like all out, you know, put the social media blast, get the Guardian article, put it all out there. So I want to thank you for that inspiration as well. What I wanted to ask is, you both have a child that's 6 years old, and I have a 6-year-old daughter as well. In the earlier panels, we spoke about the lack of diversity, especially in Muslim characters for the books that are aimed towards the children of that age. How do you guys find it, like when you're reading books to your children? Because I have a quote from, I was listening to Maxine speak, and she said she went to the library and she said, I had a realization that my child is more likely to be able to read a book that is narrated by a talking bear or a penguin than a child who looks like her. So I don't know if, because you're in the adult space, but because you have little children, are you finding the same lack of diversity in the children's books, the same levels of frustration that I'm feeling as a mother?
Yeah, so we have to put this into the perspective that demonstrates how serious the problem is. There are 2 billion Muslims in the world. That means 1 in 4 people. You can literally do a university degree in literature and not study one Muslim text. You could do a philosophy degree and not study any Muslim philosophy, just to show you how serious this particular problem is. All the ancient Greek philosophy that we have access to in the West, which sets the foundations of the Western philosophical tradition, was only made accessible to the Europeans, to the Renaissance thinkers, because of a Muslim Renaissance that took place in Iraq. And yet you could literally do a degree in philosophy at university, study Plato, Aristotle, and Socrates, and then fast track to the Renaissance thinkers and completely skip that middle period, which made it all possible, which is the Muslim Enlightenment that happened in Iraq. That's not an accident. Edward Said, the important Palestinian scholar, observed, and I've been making this point, I've already made this point several times, but it's not an accident. If you're going to invade these people and occupy their lands, you have to dehumanize them. You have to intentionally keep the portrait of us simplistic. And if you look at the literature of the Muslim tradition, and the Arab tradition, again, I know it's a Muslim festival, but I'm from an Arab background, so they're one and the same for me. If you look at the literature from these communities, it is incredibly poetic and romantic. And it's not the kind of narrative that is convenient for an Orientalist agenda. In terms of the reading that we do, what I would say to our audience is, if you are going to read a book that has more than 4 characters and one of them is not Muslim, that is a statistical mistake. It's a factual error in the way you're reading. And if you're reading literature, think about the last 4 books you read. If you're reading literature and 1 in 4 of those books is not written by a Muslim writer, again, it's a factual error. You're reading incorrectly. You're not reading in a way that is representative of the reality of the world that you live in.
Wow, fantastic. Just on that, sorry, Usker, if you did have another question, there was another question that came through from the audience that sort of stemmed a little bit with what we were talking about.
And I want to hear from Amani as well.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead. I'm just going to grab that question while you talk. Yeah.
Okay, I'll make a separate point. I think because I completely agree with everything Mohammed said. I've been lucky to be able to kind of curate what my children are exposed to and make conscious choices and to learn about these issues at the same time as I've been raising small children. One of the things that I feel is particularly important is to teach my children how we are settlers on this land. I would like that message to be instilled in them from a young age, because it both challenges the model migrant upbringing that I was given and prepares them to be better allies in the future. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that I've been trying to do is to keep an eye out for picture books that tell Indigenous Australian stories. A recent one that I bought was Daybreak by Amy Maguire and illustrated by Matt Chun. Yep. I bought 2 copies of that, donated one to the childcare. The childcare actually ended up building that week's extension activities around the themes in that book, even though the book was a bit advanced for the children in the classroom. And I feel by just doing that, you can help spread these conversations through your own immediate community and expose your children and other children, hopefully, to the stories that they need to be exposed to in order to be, I think, better people down the track. So for me, it's not just about finding myself represented in the books that my children read or finding them represented in the books they read, but finding pertinent issues and Indigenous communities and people whose stories are also not being platformed, shared with my children from a young age. So it's not something they're learning about, but it's something that they know and have been brought up with from an early stage of their lives.
Yeah, thank you. With the questions we did have from the audience, you did answer them during that conversation, so thank you very much anyway for those. Sister Aksin, our co-founder, had a question for you. Before I bring her in, there was one question from one of our members, Inda Ahmad Zari, would like to know who your favorite authors were and why.
I'm going to take this opportunity to say that this year there have been 3 incredibly inspiring books that came out that are my favorite books this year. The first is The Mother Wound by Amani Haydar, and I literally have it next to me. I keep it next to me at the moment. So I really strongly encourage people to grab it, inshallah. And then the other incredible Arab and Muslim women writers that have released books this year, Sarah El Sayed's Muddy People, which is about the Egyptian Muslim experience in Brisbane, and Randa Abdul Fattah's book, Coming of Age in the War on Terror, which I think is an incredibly important book because it's incredibly comprehensive and it covers 20 years of Islamophobia and xenophobia for an entire generation of people that grew up in the post 9/11 era. And what I would say in particular with Randa's book is that it's a fantastic companion book for pretty much any Arab and Muslim book that you have read that was published in the last 20 years.
Sister Amani?
we're going to end up having similar responses. I recently wrote one of those what I'm reading pieces for Me Engine, and the books that I spoke about were The Other Half of You, Mohammed's book, which I found to be incredibly powerful, not just because it had so many parallels with my own story, but because it was different in a way that I could still relate to, and it gave me a promise of Arab men or men challenging toxicity within their lives. And I think that's really valuable. You know, I don't think I've mentioned this publicly before, but once you've been harmed by multiple men in your lives, it's almost frightening to engage with stories of men. And it's important to me, as part of the healing process and as part of what's been researched as well, we heal within relationships. And in order to restore what's been damaged, I think it's really important that we see examples of men challenging that toxicity, passing on something better to the next generation, and building the type of world that will create a better, you know, a sense of harmony between men and women, and cross-culturally too. So I think that's really valuable to me to read and to engage with, because it's rare in my life.
Sure, thank you. Oh,
yeah, I would like to say that Sarah El-Sayed's book was a joy to read as well. And one of the ones that I quickly moved on to after reading The Other Half of You. And I've steadily been building up a collection of Arab Australian literature and literature by Muslim authors in order to keep supporting and championing those writers.
I want to quickly take the opportunity to say Dr. Jumana Beya, who's, in my opinion, the Australia's best scholar on Arab diaspora writing, wrote a fantastic article in Overland Literary Journal. Anyone that's here right now can jump online and read it, which talks about those 4 books: The Other Half of You, The Mother Wound, Coming of Age in the War on Terror, and Sarah El-Sayed's book, Muddy People, in the context of the 20-year anniversary of the September 11 attacks. So I really encourage people to check that out. It's a really fantastic piece of writing.
Wonderful. I'm noting that as well. Thank you for that. I'm going to get on and look at that. Sister Aksan, if you can hear me, please unmute yourself. She's our co-founder. Yes, she had a question too. Can you hear me? Yeah, wonderful.
Mohammed and Amani, I just want to say I am gobsmacked as to what I'm hearing, because number one, we cannot deny that our fellow Arab sisters in our Muslim community have been trailblazers in the literacy revolution in Australia. That's undeniably correct. I mean, no one can really deny that. And so what we want to encourage with TRPC is that we want more racially, ethnically diverse Muslim voices, because it's all our Arab sisters that are doing that. You know, they're the pioneers in all of this. But having said that, when I hear your stories, what I'm overwhelmed with is how contrary my Turkish Muslim upbringing was, and the vision and the models that we had in our male community is so contrary. You know, I come from a Turkish Muslim mosque that is so inclusive of women. You can't help but celebrate it. And I think that you've encouraged us to come out and tell our stories more than hearing all these great Arab community stories. But ultimately what I wanted to say, because Mohammed, you mentioned that you have to write like you're dead, right? That's profound by saying that. But I think in saying that, do you think in your subconscious, and Amani, you're ultimately aware that you are accountable only to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? To God, that really empowered you to write your story. Because, you know, a foundation in Islamic jurisprudence is that you are only judged with your intentions. And then sometimes the repercussions can be contrary to your intentions, right? Do you think it was that deep down in your subconscious, you know that you're only accountable to God? So I'm going to write this. Do you think that was the driving force, and that is what broke the shackles of your inhibitions that you had, Amani, that you mentioned?
I think it can be empowering to think in terms of your relationship with God, if that's something that's like valuable within your creative process. But as part of my accountability to God, I consider myself accountable to my society. I consider myself accountable to my family. And within Islam, we have a social structure, and we conceive of society as being so interrelated. That's part of the philosophy of Tawheed. It's part of the philosophy of how we envision utopia. So for me, my accountability to God is never, ever going to be separate to my accountability to the vulnerable people in society, my accountability to my loved ones, my accountability to my brothers and sisters, and my global accountability as a citizen of the world where there is so much interrelated oppression. So for me, it would be really reductive to say that it's only between me and God, and I don't agree with that worldview. For me, if something is between me and God, then it's between me and everybody else. And there's a real power in finding community and solidarity and working in that space rather than fostering just an individual approach to your storytelling and your advocacy or your activism.
I 100% agree with Amani. So I have nothing to add on the question of faith. My answer is Amani's answer. But I do want to talk a little bit about that split between Arab excellence and Muslim excellence in Australia. I'm actually aware of it. I am very aware that the Arab Australian community, and whether we've been experiencing some examples of people accusing us of having Arab privilege. If you want to call it that, that's fine. But I call it Arab excellence, and I'm very proud of the Arab excellence I'm seeing in my community. But I'm also aware that there are other Muslim communities who are feeling very underrepresented. But here's the thing I want to say to all my Muslim brothers and sisters of racially and culturally diverse backgrounds. Don't go on Twitter and attack us. Don't attack your Arab brothers and sisters. Don't troll Sweatshop. Don't abuse me and accuse me of being a problem because I happen to be a successful Arab Muslim. Don't accuse Amani. Especially don't accuse Amani. She's gone through enough to have earned her place in this industry. What I encourage and invite my brothers and sisters of a Muslim background to do, if they're feeling underrepresented, is to email me, contact Sweatshop, and say, I want to work with you. You have absolutely no idea how generous we are, how big our hearts are, how much we love you. You have two choices. You can attack us or you can contact us and say, let's work together. I promise you, if you do the latter, you will excel. You will stand beside me and Amani, inshallah.
Amen. Oh, well said. That's very moving and very inspiring. I'm not of the Arab community. I'm Indonesian Australian, and my father is a Ariva. He's of Australian Irish descent, hence the name McCann. So, you know, I'm not represented in anything really. There was only one book I read by Melati Lam with an Indonesian Australian character, but I'm very gobsmacked to hear that people are attacking you, because I believe truly that both of you have really earned your place in the literary space, and you're doing us Muslims proud, and you are truly inspiring to all of us like myself who are still aspiring to get published, inshallah. So on that note, I want to thank you very much for telling us and sharing with us your stories. To the viewers, for the questions and the comments that you have sent through, thank you very much. So Brother Mohammed Ahmad and to Sister Amani Haydar, thank you once again for sharing your story and being here, giving up your time to talk to us and being part of our festival. It truly was an honor to share the virtual stage with you both. And to everyone else, thank you very much. Don't forget, please go to Better Read Than Dead website. Their books are available for you to purchase. Don't forget, it is free shipping, and I'm pretty sure that is still available till the end of the festival, that particular special. So once again, to both of you, thank you very much, and to everybody, jazakallah khairan. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you.
Alaikum salam. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for being here.